The first one I ever listened to was that girl who's now on Vice with your Vice collab.
Oh, yeah.
And I just I'm driving to this big presentation that I'm about to give, and I'm literally sobbing in the car.
Oh, no.
And I'm like, oh shit, I got to turn this off. I can't do this.
Yeah, some of these get pretty heavy.
Yeah, really heavy.
There's a time and a place to listen to this shit.
Yeah, that's what I tell people when I send it. I don't even know. I probably send it to 50 people, and I'm like, this is not family time. This is it's on an airplane or post meditation in the morning.
This is not safe for work. Even though I get tons of viewers that tell me that they're watching at work.
At work, oh my gosh, I can't even imagine.
All right, so Beau, so you grew up Mormon.
I did.
In what state?
So I grew up in Carmel, California, Central Coast.
So not Utah, but...
No, not Utah. So I live in Salt Lake City now, but we moved there a few years ago. So I spent my whole life in California.
And was it like growing up Mormon in Carmel?
Yeah, so we were one of the only families in Carmel. And we were kind of like the family where we had to drive into Monterey 20, 25 minutes to get to church. And my dad was the bishop of the congregation there, which is the father of the congregation. And it was just our life. It was kind of everything. But it was an ideal place to grow up, too. I mean, Carmel's Carmel.
Yeah, Carmel's beautiful.
Yeah, that's great.
What was your childhood like, being Mormon?
So I grew up there's 4 boys in my family, and Mormonism brought structure to us, for sure. And it brought, a really deep sense of purpose and a really deep sense of, who we were, right? From the tiniest, when we were little, it's you're special, you're a child of God, you are a future priesthood holder, you're a future leader, you're part of the kingdom of God on the earth, and your role in this kingdom is to bring as many people into it as possible. And we kind of grew up with that mission-driven purpose, right? We're just we're special in this way. So it gave confidence.
Do you looking back at it now, do you see it as a cult?
Yes, I do. And I would say cult is so loaded.
Yeah, it's a loaded word.
So loaded. By definition, it's a cult. And it's the nicest cult in the world. It really is. Mm-hmm. And it's and I'm not one of these people who you listen to cult documentaries or whatever, and you're just they're fuck the church. It was horrible. It did nothing but bad things. I don't feel that way at all. I'm so grateful that I was raised Mormon and that I've spent the vast majority of my life being Mormon. It brought a lot of good. I also brought a lot of shadow.
On my first portrait project, Create Equal, I went into a Mormon community, I think in Utah, and we saw we were inside the house with families that have 12, 13 kids.
Wow. We
saw it pretty intimately.
Yeah.
And you can sense when there's really weird shit going on.
For sure.
I didn't feel any of that.
Yeah.
It seemed pretty wholesome, and everyone seemed smiling, and the kids seemed happy, and the wives didn't seem to be abused or anything like that. It seemed pretty happy and healthy.
Yeah. And that's what you're going to find with a lot of Mormon families. And there are offshoots, right? So there's the fundamental Mormons, who the fundamentalists are the polygamists, Southern Utah, Arizona, that area. I didn't grow up in fundamentalist Mormon.
But that's what I saw.
And that's what you saw, for sure, because you said wives. And we see those in Utah. We'll be at Costco, and there'll be 5 wives who are shopping. I've never been part of that. So that part of the church is probably the closest to what Joseph Smith's church looked like before he was killed. And that's just lived on in that way. But when Brigham Young took over the church, he moved it in a very different direction. And ultimately, polygamy was abandoned. Although they still practice polygamy, spiritual polygamy in the church today. So, for example, the person who's the president of the church, his name's Dallin Oaks, and he is sealed in the temple, which is our marriage, our version of marriage, to multiple women. So polygamy still, it runs deep in Mormonism.
And what do you think of that?
I think it's terrible.
Do you?
I think it's awful. Yeah, years ago, I remember. A
lot of guys would be like, "Oh, I like the idea of that," but
amazingly,
I don't think the reality is.
I've heard that. I've heard guys say I can't wait for polygamy to be able to practice polygamy in the next life. To me, it's always just felt so devaluing of women.
Yeah, see, I'm a one-woman man, so I can't even imagine that.
Same, yeah, for sure. No question.
It's either you have to pick one. Pick one.
Yeah, pick one. Yeah, totally agree. And so the whole polygamy thing, like nowhere in the church is it practiced, but in the church it's still practiced spiritually. In other words, they've been sealed to multiple women. Like if one of the wives die, then they'll take on another wife and be sealed to them so that in the eternities they're together forever in a polygamous family. And the president of the church today has that.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, very. So the church served me and my family really well when we were young. Like I said, it gave us structure, it gave us a purpose, a reason for being. We went through some really hard things when we were little. So my mom carries the gene for hemophilia, which is a bleeding disorder where my blood doesn't clot at all.
Blood's
Zero.
thinner?
It's thinner, but it's missing factor 8, which is the clotting factor. So like if you get hit, like you're out surfing, your board hits you, whatever, you're gonna maybe get a bruise. Well, my bruise, that hematoma, doesn't turn into a bruise. It just keeps bleeding and bleeding and bleeding internally until I get an IV. So 3 out of the 4 boys in my family are severe hemophiliacs. And so we just grew up in a lot of pain, like constant bleeding. And in the 80s, the medicine was like not super accessible. And so we could get it when we could. And when we had like an outbreak of bleeding, then we could get medicine. Also downside of 1980s medicine and pre-1980s is that it wasn't heat treated. And so my brother got AIDS from the medicine. He got HIV. And when he was 7.5, he was diagnosed with HIV and with full-blown AIDS. And he was patient 01 at Stanford Hospital.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. So our lives like completely turned upside down at that point. My parents were like 30 years old. They had 4 kids, and Ben's incredibly sick. My brother Ben is totally sick. We're living at the Ronald McDonald House, kind of like shuffling between, members of our church who are taking us in, and home and grandparents in LA, and the hospital in Orange County, or in Palo Alto.
Did he survive?
He did not survive.
Wow.
Yeah, they kept him alive for about 18 months, and then he died. And it was a horrific death. I mean, they had almost nothing back then. It was like 1985. And so by 86, he died. Also during that time, like I said, we were living at the Ronald McDonald House, and each of us boys, the younger boys, we were all assigned like a big brother person to take care of us because we spent a lot of time alone. I think about it now, and I think about the vulnerability of a 7-year-old. I was 7 at the time, and this guy took me in the bathroom and sexually molested me, and kind of started my sexuality in a really fucked up way.
At 7 years old?
At 7 years old.
Jesus.
And so he sucked on me, and then he asked me to do it to him. And that was the last thing I remember. I remember every detail of the bathroom we were in. I remember exactly where we were. I remember everything. And then when I said no to him, I have zero memory after that of it. The next memory I have is at some point in the future, I must have told my parents. And I was sitting down with police officers looking through photo catalogs of perpetrators to try to find the guy. Oh. Never confronted him, never found him. It was just kind of... washed away. He
was Mormon as well?
No. I don't know who he was. He was just a volunteer with the Stanford Hospital.
Oh, I see.
And so this period of my life, it's like I get abused. My life's kind of upside down. I'm already in this kind of like transient, insecure place of like, where are we going to even be tonight? So this happens. About 6 months later, my brother dies. My mom, after he died, her kind of self-therapy was to write a book about it. And so she took her journals and she wrote a book, and it's called Go Toward the Light. And that book was like a national bestseller, and she traveled all over the world doing a book tour.
Oh, great.
It was great. It was good therapy for her. And then they made a movie about it. And so the movie kind of, went big, and that was kind of her way of dealing with it. And then my dad, 3 weeks after my brother died, was called into the stake president, which is like the leader of all the bishops in the Mormon church, and asked to be the bishop of the Monterey congregation 3 weeks after Ben died. And that was a super heavy responsibility. So you have this family that's kind of like in disarray and survival mode. And mom's doing her book and the tour. My dad's spending 20 hours a week, 30 hours a week being the bishop. And that foundation that we had of like, this is the kingdom of God and the most important thing really came into play then, so that we could kind of support my mom being a good missionary out in the world, telling people, you know, in a Mormon way, how do you help your child die? And my dad being the spiritual leader of 600 people. And so we just grew up that way. And as I grew up in the church, it gave me that sense of purpose that I've talked about, but it also began to give me a lot of shame and a lot of guilt, because I grew up, and as I hit puberty, I started masturbating. I started doing things that were like normal teenager things. But in the Mormon church, there's zero tolerance for that. You can't masturbate. There is no porn. There's no sexuality. You just shove it down. And it's because there's this teaching, kind of like root doctrine of Mormonism. There's a scripture in the Book of Mormon, Mosiah 3:19, that says the natural man is an enemy to God.
Really?
Yeah. And so on one hand, I feel so valuable and like so much purpose. And on the other hand, like deep down in my core, I'm an enemy to God. And the balancing of those two, I couldn't handle, because I needed to be clean. And because of the abuse, because of being abused, I just always felt dirty. I always felt like I was in a spiritual deficit because of that. And in fact, one of the prophets of the church, he gave a talk once addressing abuse. And he said that at some point, the abused, 7-year-old boy, the abused needs to ask themselves, what is my role in this abuse? What is my fault in this?
Did you come up with anything?
No. I mean, I how could it possibly have been my fault? Any of it.
None of it.
And so that rocked me, where it's like, oh my gosh, this is my fault. And so it put me in this like shame, sin cycle of like needing the church to be forgiven, but constantly feeling broken. And I recognize that that's like also kind of Christianity, right? Where like you need Christ to be able to be forgiven, to overcome. And I think that can be healthy. But my experience in the Mormon church was that it was so high control that it put me into this place of like OCD. And later on in my life, I've learned that there's this thing called scrupulosity, and that's religious OCD. And what that looked like for me was, I'm a 16-year-old boy and I masturbated this week. I need to go confess to my bishop before I can go bless the sacrament, the bread and the water for everybody. Well, if I did masturbate, then I don't get the privilege. I'm unworthy of doing it. And so in front of everybody, I have this shame parade that I'm not up there doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And so it's just this cycle of like needing it, needing to confess, needing to repent, needing, the atonement, but also constant shame and constant fear of being unworthy. And that balance of like, I'm so special, I'm a child of God, I'm a Mormon, I've got all the truth, I've got it all figured out with total certainty. And at the same time, I'm empty because I'm an enemy to God.
How long were you part of the active church?
I was a fully active member of the church for 42 years.
Oh, really?
I'm 46 now. Just left a few years ago.
So you're still 100% into it.
Oh, yeah. Like 100%. I mean, growing up is like, I'm going to go on a mission. I went on a mission, served my mission in South Chicago, Spanish speaking. Awesome. I learned how to work 20-hour days every day, nonstop, right? Learned how to connect with people on a deep emotional level. Learned how to learn a script or a doctrine or a teaching and be able to teach it to others in a very passionate way so that they could feel the spirit and then want to join the church. And I think one of the most valuable lessons I learned on my mission was one of the the leaders from Salt Lake came, and all the missionaries came together to hear him speak. And the first thing he said was to all these missionaries, hundreds of missionaries, he said, "Why are you here?" And of course we knew, right? Like arms shooting up, like, I'm here to baptize people. I'm here to convert everybody in Chicago. I'm here to whatever. And it was like, he went on for like 20 different answers from the missionaries. And finally he goes, "Nope, that's not why you're here. You're here to learn obedience. That's why you're on a mission." And then he had each of us take out this little thing called the White Bible. You keep it over your heart. It's all the rules of the mission. And he said, write in it these words: "I will set the perfect example of exact obedience. That is the purpose of your mission. Be obedient." And so it reframed, because I didn't grow up, even though we were super active in the church, I didn't grow up like extremely Orthodox, where I had like very harsh parents. I had very loving parents. Loving in a system that is harsh, but very loving parents. And so when I went on my mission, I learned Orthodoxy. And that need to feel loved and that need to feel whole that I didn't have because of my previous experiences in this kind of like atonement churn, that really, really set in on my mission, where it's like, okay, I got this. This I can do. I can be perfect. I can be the example of exact obedience. And so I climbed the ladder in my mission. And missionaries, like, everybody's seen a Mormon missionary, right? It's like the young kids, 19 years old, white shirt, little tie, little plaque with their name, Elder Oyler. And, I learned invaluable lessons on my mission. Like I said, working hard, connecting with people, being part of a system. But really what I was a sales agent. And I was selling salvation to people who were far older than me as a 19, 20-year-old. And that's a really hard thing to do, sell salvation. And so like post-mission and into my career, it's like, if I can sell salvation to a stranger, I can sell anything to anyone. And I definitely took that into my career.
How has your attitudes about being a Mormon changed over the years?
So like I said, I learned Orthodoxy on my mission, which is like very strict Mormonism. You do everything. You are this perfect example of Mormonism. As I got home from my mission, like life happened, right? And what happens at the end of your mission is that your mission president, who's like the leader over the missionaries, he sits you down and he says, Elder Oyler, you were a great missionary. You baptized whatever, how many people, the Lord is very pleased with you. The next thing in your life is to get married in the temple. That is your next goal. And it's like, okay, I got my orders, sir. I'm going to do it. And so I got home and I moved to Utah, from Carmel to Utah, because that's where all the Mormon girls are. And I moved into a condo in Provo, Utah, and enrolled in school there and met my wife within months. And we dated for like 6 months. And she's also from the Bay Area as well. And she was at BYU, and we got married and in the Oakland Temple. And honestly, like I feel, especially now, like that we've transitioned out of the church, we've been married for almost 24 years. And it's like, I feel so lucky that like we married each other practically as kids, right? Like 2021, like we've changed so much. How is it possible that we still are in love and want to be together every day?
How do you account for that? Because you were pressured to get married.
Sure,
go get married.
Well, yeah. Also, there's pressure because
find a partner.
You can't have sex. You cannot have premarital sex and still get married in the temple. If you do, you have to wait a year. You have to cancel your temple marriage and wait a year until you can go back. And if you have sex again in that year, no go. And you just keep going until you can get your act and, get yourself in line.
Being celibate for 12 months.
Yes. But we were both celibate. And so we barely made it because we were 20, 21-year-old kids who were very attracted to each other. But we did. And it was interesting because when we went to get married in the Oakland Temple, it was a beautiful day. Like everything about it was wonderful. And I was so happy and so grateful to be marrying my wife. And yet, like, the moments before we were going into the marriage room, which they called the sealing room, I was feeling unworthy. I was sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, if Heather only knew that I have done this and this and this and this, and oh my gosh, have I repented for this? And oh my gosh, I masturbated like a month ago. Like, I didn't tell my bishop about that. Like, oh no, my marriage is cursed because I'm not perfect. And that was the feeling the moment before I went in to get married. And now I feel robbed, right? Like robbed of this incredible, what it could have been, to just be able to present myself there and be like, Heather, I'm imperfect, but I love you. Let's do this thing. And instead it was like this rote ritual that they do for you. You don't write your own vows. There's no exchange of here's what I'm going to bring to the marriage. It's just everything's written out for you. And you just say yes, and then you're married.
It's a bit of you're a follower under this. Very
much so. Yeah, very much so. There's always somebody above you in the system, the Mormon system, always. Now, and that's as a man, and that's as a white man. Remember that until 1978, black people couldn't even have the priesthood. They couldn't even go to the temple. They couldn't even hold significant callings in the church because of the racist doctrine that is in the Mormon scriptures. And so I had every privilege in the world as a white middle-class male in Mormonism. Women have no priesthood, like literally zero authority in the church. There's not one single woman of the 17 million members who has priesthood authority. And so as a follower, yes, you're a follower because you're always following the prophet. Whatever the current prophet is and that trickles down, you are committed to following that. When we go to the temple, we make promises, and those are called covenants. And one of the promises is that we will give our time, talents, and everything with which the Lord has blessed you to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Not to God, but to the church. And so you have that mentality of like, yes, I'm going to follow the prophet. When you're a little kid, you sing these songs like, follow the prophet, follow the prophet. And so it's very much like you're idolizing this person as the prophet of God, and you feel like, I'm so lucky. How is it that of, billions of people on the earth, I got so lucky to be, in the true church and to be able to follow the true prophet? Now what happened with me is that I followed the prophet really, really well. And I began, as I grew up and having more life experience, I began seeing that what the prophet was asking us to do or teaching us, I would feel like, well, that doesn't feel right. Or that doesn't feel very like loving or what Jesus would do. But he's the prophet, so I'm going to follow him and everything will be okay. And a good example of that is 2008? Prop 8. Prop 8 in California, which was gay marriage, legalizing gay marriage. And the leadership of the church literally created an internal campaign in the church to fight against Prop 8. And we were asked to volunteer, we were asked to give money, we were asked to call people, we were asked to stand on corners with signs that were anti-Prop 8 and to campaign for it. And I did. And inside of me, I just had this rotten feeling like this isn't right. Like, this isn't right. What are we doing? But the prophet asked us to do this, so we're going to do it. And I say that was the first time that like my inner compass was like, hey, Beau, like this is not love. And so I began to have dissonance between what I felt was right and what seemed like Jesus would feel was right and what the prophet was teaching or asking us to do. And that's when I was, late 20s.
What is the view from the church you were in, the Mormon church you were in, to the fundamentalist Mormons?
The difference is that the fundamentalists essentially practice the original form of Mormonism with polygamy. Mm-hmm. They still have a prophet. Their prophet is in jail because he molested a bunch of girls. Once again, not dissimilar to Joseph Smith and what he did. And so there's really no structural connection between the fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
But what is the attitude like from your church to that?
Our attitude is like, they're not Mormons, they're not members of the church, don't even talk to us about it.
They're crazy?
It's like we want to distance ourselves as much as possible because they're nutty. Well, the doctrines are the same. We just don't practice polygamy in our mortal form. We do spiritually, but we don't anymore. And so members of the church try to distance themselves from fundamentalism as much as possible.
And you have children?
I do. Yeah, I've got two amazing kids. One is 19. He's in college in University of Hawaii. And the other's 13, and she's an 8th grader. And they're both just badasses, super adventurous kids.
And they're Mormon?
They were.
They were?
They were.
And they're no longer?
No longer. So 3 years ago, well, let me tell this first. So we're growing up. My wife and I are growing up. We're having kids just like we're supposed to, right? But we're a little bit rogue because we waited till our like mid to late 20s to have kids, and so I'm like climbing up the ladder pretty quickly within the church because I'm obedient. I'm a little bit like rogue, a little bit different. But obedient and loyal enough that I'm really climbing fast. And so at 32 years old, which is very young in the church, I was called to be in the bishopric, which means that it's like the 3 top people who lead a congregation, which is called a ward. And I was with one of my best friends. Okay, so he was the bishop, I was his right hand. And it was awesome. Like, this was like everything I had dreamed of in church leadership. I had a list in my back pocket of like, if I'm ever in the bishopric, like I'm doing this. And we did it. And it was fantastic. And he was also very progressive. And so we were like breaking rules left and right to just try to create a better, ward family, better congregation. And, about a year into that, I had the idea of like, hey, let's go, the young men, which are like the teenagers, the scouts, Boy Scouts in the LDS church used to be super tied together until all of the abuse and molestation stuff started coming out. And so the church then separated from Boy Scouts. But that was a huge part of my growing up, and it still was at this point in the church. So the bishopric, which is like the 3 guys who are in charge of the ward, I was like, let's go backpack up near Yosemite and meet up with the boys who are backpacking, and let's surprise them and bring like a bunch of brownies and cookies and like do like a spiritual message. So we're hiking up, and my bishop, who's a very good friend of mine, 42 years old, has a heart attack on the trail. We have no cell service, no way to contact anybody. I go into CPR, we go into CPR, he dies in my arms. So there we are on the trail, sun is setting, it's just the 3 of us. I'm holding his body and losing it emotionally. And so everything got taken care of. We finally got help, got off the mountain, got home by like 4 or 5 in the morning. That next day, the Oakland leaders called and said, we'd like you to be the bishop for the next 6 weeks. 6 weeks later, I got another call, and they came over at like 9 or 10 o'clock at night, and they said, the prophet has asked you to be the bishop, and we're here to extend that calling. And so at 33 years old, with a 2-month-old child, I get called to be bishop. And usually when a new bishop is like made the bishop the next day at church, it's like a celebration. Mine was like a funeral. It was so sad because everybody knew the previous bishop who died should have been the bishop. Like, that was God's plan. So like, what happened here? Something went wrong. And so it was a pretty unique time to become a bishop, and I just started meeting with people as much as I could to understand their pains. And what happened over the 5-year period of time that I served as bishop is that I went from a somewhat orthodox view of like, this is it, total certitude, the church is true, Joseph Smith's a true prophet, the prophet today is the true prophet, this is the kingdom of God on earth, everybody would be better if they were Mormon, to a year in, I come home from my bishop meetings, which is like interviews of people telling me their deepest, darkest secrets and repenting. I get home, and my wife, who's pretty stoic, like doesn't really cry much. And I get into bed, and she's like sobbing. And I'm like, what's going on? And she's like, I can't tell you. And I'm like, people tell me everything, honey. Like, you can tell me. And so after about 30 minutes of just laying there together, she just said, Beau, the church isn't what we think it is. And Joseph Smith did some really bad things. I don't think he was a prophet. And this was just a bomb, just. And what we're taught to do in the church is that there is God and there's Satan. And anything that goes against the church, anything, is from Satan. And so you can't give any space to it whatsoever. And growing up, people are always like, hey, Beau, you should read this. You should read this. You should read this. You know, like there were some friends that I'd always be with I grew up surfing in the lineup, and they were Jehovah's Witnesses, really good people. And they were like, hey, Beau, you should read this. And I'm like, no. Those are all lies. All lies. That's anti-Mormon. And even on my mission, someone gave me a book. And I'm like, that's anti-Mormon. None of that's true. You can't believe that. It's just Satan attacking God's real kingdom. And then one day on my mission, I read it. And I was like, oh my gosh. Joseph Smith says he had 36 wives, a few of which were teenagers, 22 of which he was already married to before he ever told his wife, 11 of which were married to other men. I'm like, yes, clearly this is Satan. This is all just whatever. So my wife studied it enough that she's like, no, Beau, this isn't Satan. This is real. So this is my first year of being bishop. I still have 4 more years of being bishop.
Oh, wow.
And she just said, Beau, I'll support you. I'll act like I believe. And maybe there's parts I still believe. Like, I'll do everything right. Don't worry. And she did. She stayed faithful.
You wrote it out for 3 years.
4 more years.
4 more years.
And it wasn't a writing out. But what that did is it put a crack in like our foundation. And at the time, I thought that crack, like I looked down in the crack and it was just like a dark abyss. Like, oh no, this is all bad. Now, 13 years later, it's actually the crack that opened up space for light to come in. And so over the years of my bishop time, I went from kind of orthodox, kind of hard ass, kind of like this is the way to do it, to being nuanced in my faith, and that there's no such thing as certitude. None of us know. Like you're taught in the church, I know the church is true. I know Joseph Smith is a true prophet. I know the Book of Mormon is the word of God. I know that God loves me. Like this, no. And I started thinking like, well, maybe we don't know. Maybe it's just faith. And so I traded certitude for curiosity. And as I became curious, I then began to open myself up to, well, maybe the church history that I know is like a whitewashed version, and maybe it's not really what truth is. And so a friend who was also Mormon in leadership with me gave me something called the CES letter. It's like 2014, 2015. And it was a compilation of all of the reality of the history of Mormonism from 1820 to today. And it rocked my world, but I wasn't ready to see it and like absorb it yet. And so I just kept serving. But I kept serving in like more and more progressive ways, where at the beginning, like if somebody came in for their temple recommend interview, which means it's like a worthiness interview to be able to go to the temple. At the beginning, I was like 15 questions. You have to exact answers. There's zero tolerance. By the end, I'm just like, oh, do you want to go to the temple? Is that part of your spiritual journey? Great. Here you go. Go. And even at one point, the bishops in our area were getting in trouble because they were giving temple recommends to gay couples. And the leaders had to come down and be like, guys, like you can't do this. And we're like, but they're married. They're living the commandments.
Has the Mormon Church bent the rules at all?
Oh, no. No, not at all. In fact, they spend millions of dollars in amicus briefs and other legal fighting, I would say, legal campaigning in D.C. to make sure that the traditional family is observed, and that gay marriage and LGBTQ rights are not a thing. And even in the handbook of instruction, which is like the rules in Mormonism, just last year, they had 2 pages of new guidelines, rules come out that were specifically transphobic. If you have trans people in your congregation, here's how to deal with them. They're not allowed in youth stuff. They are not allowed in certain bathrooms. They have to go to the classes of their birth. Basically, they can't be trans here.
How do you feel about all that?
I feel that it's disgusting that an organization would be so unloving and so conditional that they can look at a group of people that are like possibly the most they need the most love. And this organization can say, you are not accepted here as you. You need to abandon that in order to come and be a full, worthy member of the church. I think it's terrible. I don't think that's what Jesus did at all, nor do I think it's what he would do if he was here today. And those types of dissonances, like this cognitive dissonance, is what started happening inside of me, where I'm like, well, I feel this way. The prophet says this. Oh, I must be wrong. I must be wrong. I must be wrong. And that's because I was always taught to outsource my spirituality to someone else. And so as I started to expand my spirituality, one of the very first things I did was to start making markings on my body to remind me of a few lessons that I learned. And the first one was this. And I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but when my brother Ben died, the last words that my mom said to him as she held his little 9-year-old body was, "Go toward the light." And so that became a family motto for us. Like, whatever the decision is, Beau, go toward the light. And so the first marking that I made was this path from darkness to light, and the stairs representing that it's like, it's a difficult path, right? There's gravity against you here. But that at the end of this, and in this journey, the higher you go, the more you journey, the more light you're gonna have. Now, this light could have been an external surface, just like I believed most of my life. Look to the prophet, look to God, look to a parent, look to bishop, look to anybody but me. And instead, I drew the light to an internal light so that I could begin to trust myself, so that I could begin to think for myself, so I could begin to explore and allow things to resonate with my spirit. And it kind of ushered me into a phase of spiritual expansion. And what I found is that the more I expanded beyond Mormonism, the more content I felt, the more at peace I felt, and that peace or like worthiness that I had been chasing my whole life began to just go away. The scrupulosity of like, I have to confess everything, I have to be perfect, it just started going away. And I just started feeling more and more content the more that I expanded my own spirituality and learned how to trust myself, which was the exact opposite of everything I'd been taught.
What kind of things did you see when you were bishop?
I saw a lot of things, because within Mormonism, you believe that your bishop has like a higher, more direct channel to God. And so people come and they confess of their sins. They ask for marriage counsel. They ask for professional career counsel. And remember, I'm like a 33-year-old kid giving like marriage advice, right? Like, the irony in that. I saw some beautiful things where I saw a lot of spiritual growth and people overcoming challenges and addictions and issues and becoming a better person. But I also saw and begin to see the structure of the church, so the system of the church and what it does and what its priorities are. I always believed that the church was here to serve the people, right? And to like create a place that people could grow and be happy. And what I saw was, let me give you a specific example. Somebody comes in, and it's somebody that I know, right? Because they're in my congregation, in my ward. And after a little bit of time of talking to me, he decides that he trusts me enough to say, "Bishop, I molested my kid." And my heart just sank. And I'm like, "Talk to me about it. What happened? What is happening? Get it out. Just get it all out now. Like, you've already uncorked it, just get it all out. And so for about 10, 15 minutes, he talked to me about all these times that he's molested his kid from 6 months old. And I'm trying not to cry. Like, I know this family. And so I open up the handbook, which is like the church instruction. What do you do in these different scenarios? And you go under abuse, and it says, call this abuse hotline. And I'm like, great, good. Like, there's going to be a therapist on the other side to help me understand what I should do here. Well, when you call that number, it goes to the church's law firm, Curtin McConkie. And they start to ask you questions. Like, okay, Bishop, what ward are you in? What stake are you in? What's the situation? I tell them the situation, and they go, oh, okay, you're in California, you're in this county, you're okay. And I'm like, okay to what? And they're like, there's no action. You don't need to take any action. Like, you're okay. Just let the brother repent, and you're let him go through the process. And I hang up the phone with Curtin McConkie, which is the abuse line to protect kids, right? Like, protect the abused. And it wasn't that at all. It was to protect the church. It was look up the legality of where you are and how can we protect the church. Not one single question around, is the child okay? Is the child still in the house with the abuser? None of that. Literally didn't matter. All that mattered was, here's where you're at. You're not a mandatory reporter. You don't need to. So I hang up the phone and I turn to this brother and I say, I'll give you 10 minutes. Either you call CPS or I call CPS. And he said, can I call my wife? And I said, of course you can. But you don't leave. You stay right here. So he calls his wife, hangs up, and he said, I'll call CPS. I said, I need you to do it right now. And so he did. He called Child Protective Services on himself. And that, for me, was a huge eye-opener. That the church was there to protect the institution, but not the individual. And what I always thought was, of course, they're going to protect the child, the vulnerable. Oh, no. No. That's not what they're there for. They're there to protect the institution. Time and time again, more abuse cases, divorce. Like, sometimes I would use the church's money, the budget that I had, to fly a woman and her children to a different state so they could get away from their abusive husband. Well, that's a positive thing that I was able to use, right? Use the church's money. The church is worth $294 billion. It is the richest religion in the United States, richer than the Catholic religion in the United States. So almost $300 billion. And that it is, the budgets are so incredibly tight that I had to be rogue in order to buy airplane tickets to get a family to safety. I had to just do that, okay? But when I would consult the church on what to do in these situations, it was always protect the good name of the church. That is your priority as bishop. And that created a huge, huge dissonance inside of me when I saw that the church's priority is to protect the church versus the individual. With the money stuff, that became really tough for me too, because I would have widows and single moms and people who had lost their job come and ask for help. And it was always push off. Yeah, you can go get some food and we'll pay for that from the bishop's storehouse, but you need to reach out to your family. You need to ask them for money. We're not paying your rent. Even though these people had been full tithe payers their whole life. And in the Mormon church, you don't get to go to the temple and have all of the blessings of Mormonism without paying 10% gross of all of your income. So here's people who are paying into the system out of faith, and when they need it, the answer is go everywhere else first. And then if you can't figure it out, we'll help you for as short of a period of time as we can. All while the church is accumulating hundreds of billions of dollars and have an entire financial arm to manage those assets and to grow those assets. And they donate to humanitarian causes a fraction of that money. Fraction. Like a tiny fraction. And then they brag about it every 6 months in their general conference of how much they donated to humanitarian efforts. And it's just sad because as a member, I didn't know that. I didn't know that the church had hundreds of billions of dollars. That would have been really helpful to be able to help my ward members and my people and even myself in times of need. And instead, it's going into an investment fund to make more money. So flash forward, I have this design agency. We're like one of the top design agencies in the world for creating brands, okay? And we're the agency behind Mr. Beast Feastables and Mark Rober and like Allbirds and Samsung and like all these really good brands. And the church reaches out and they say, hey, we understand that you were a bishop. In fact, some of our employees know you and we'd like to talk to you about a project. And so I came into church headquarters in Salt Lake and they wanted to rebrand the financial arm of the church. And they hired me to do that and to create a website to be able to tell their story. You know, why does the church have hundreds of billions of dollars? Why are they investing it? Because it seems like it's a nonprofit, it's a religion. Like, why are we out here making money for profit? Help us tell that story. And so I took it on. I took on the project and I signed the NDAs, and I can't talk about much because I'm still under NDA. But the first question I asked when we kicked off was, my understanding, because of this whistleblower that happened last year, because one of the employees from the financial team blew the whistle. They came out and said, hey, the church is creating shell companies to hide hundreds of millions and possibly billions from their members. And the government needs to know this. And so a SEC investigation happened, and the church received the largest fine in SEC history to a church because they were found guilty of creating all these shell companies to be able to hide hundreds of millions of dollars from its members. So, and why? So that members will continue to pay tithing, right? Like, obviously. And so I helped them. And when I got in there, I asked them, I said, what is the truth behind this $100 million thing? Do you really have that much money? And they just kind of smiled and they just said, far more. This is the Lord's money. It's been donated by members of the church who are faithful. And it is our job to take that money, the widow's mite, and turn it into as much as we possibly can. So that when the prophet receives an inspiration, there is never a financial worry whatsoever. And I sat with that and I thought, so your priority is to make as much money so that the prophet, when he receives a revelation, can do whatever he wants, build another $500 million temple somewhere in the world, while you have members of the church who are literally starving, and they're not the priority. And it was just, once again, one of these like huge dissonances that happened, where I'm like, now I understand. Now I understand with clarity what the goals of the church are. And it's not the person. It's not the people. It's not their spiritual progress. It is to be the empire of the kingdom of God on the earth. And so it got to the point about 3 or 4 years ago where there was one more catalyst. So we have a 15-year-old son. Our 19-year-old was 15 at the time. And my wife and I were getting ready for bed. And I don't remember if you have kids. Do you have kids?
I do. Two daughters.
Okay. So how old are they?
22 and 24.
So you may have had this experience where you're going to bed and it's like 11:30 at night and you're shot, and then your teenager comes in to talk. And what we learned was teenagers like to talk right before they go to bed. Mm-hmm. That's when they open up. And so right as we're like brain dead, they're like, I need to talk. And so we just learned over time that like, hey, like this is golden. You come and talk to us anytime. If it has to be at midnight, that's fine. So we're getting to bed and our son comes in and he was all red-eyed. We could tell he'd been crying. And he sits on the bed and he says, Mom and Dad, I need to talk to you about something. And we're like, yeah, shoot, talk to us. And he said, I just want you to know, and keep in mind that this is when we live in Salt Lake now, so this is only like 3 or 4 years ago. He said, I want you to know that when people at school ask me if I'm Mormon, I say no. And at this, we're like totally active in the church, very progressive, but like very active in the church still. And we said, Luke, talk to us. Like, help us understand. And he said, it's really simple. I know there's all the history stuff, there's all the Joseph Smith stuff, and like, there's all that stuff, and that's not what it is. And we're like, what is it then? And he said, I'm not racist, sexist, or homophobic, and I refuse to be part of an organization that is. At 15.
You raised a good kid.
He's an amazing kid. I mean, our kids, there was something about my wife and I's DNA, but man, these kids are just amazing. 15.
That's great.
And we look at each other and we just started laughing. And he's like, what? And my wife's like, we feel the same way. And he just goes, then what are we doing? And that was this catalyst that we needed to really start to deconstruct our faith and really ask ourselves, like, what do we believe? And I'm now willing to look into the realities of Mormonism and just call it what it is. And so that started us on a journey that went about 2 years of full deconstruction of our Mormon faith. And it ran deep. I mean, basically everything we believed. And there were times of like incredible loneliness and anger and sadness and mourning and completely losing my identity, because I was like, to be bishop at 33 in the church is very rare. And it was already being told to me what was next. And then after that, and then after that. And then, in fact, I even had one prayer, like a blessing that a church leader put his hands on my head and he prophesied, he foresaw that I would be in the highest councils of the church one day if I stay faithful. And so I just knew. I knew that was my calling in life. That was my purpose. And so it was a total identity crisis and an identity shift for me to say, hey, I actually don't want to be Mormon anymore. I actually don't want my future to be one of these general authority Mormon leaders who are out, doing this work in the world. I feel like there's something bigger and better. And that's when I started exploring other forms of spirituality, one of which is plant medicine. And I had never done anything. I had never had a drink. I had never smoked weed, like nothing. I was a very good Mormon in that way. And I just kept watching these documentaries, Michael Pollan and How to Change Your Mind and that psychedelic therapy, and all this was happening. It was like 4 or 5 years ago. And I'm like, I think this could be good for me. And so I did my first psychedelic journey. And that was everything that it promised to be. It was like the most spiritual experience I'd ever had in my life and a total brain reset. And my subconscious actually showed me how, as a family, we're going to navigate this. And so soon after that, we sat down on our front lawn in Salt Lake one day and shared with our kids that we're no longer going to be participating in the church. And we said, if you want to, we're here to support you 100%. But we're not going to anymore. We're still friendly. We're still friends with our neighbors, our family. We're not going to attack the church. We're not going to be these like anti-Mormons. We're just not going to be Mormon. We're not going to participate in the church anymore. And so then what my subconscious had showed me is what we did. And we went around in a circle and we said, going forward out of the church, it's going to be really important that we live our values. Now, we have all been taught what our values are by the church. What we want to do now as a family is establish what are our values. What are your personal values that you're going to live by? And we all went around the circle and shared values, and we talked for 2 hours about what our values are. What do we value, and how can we live those values without the structure of the church? Now, anybody who's had teenagers knows that you don't sit there for 2 hours and have deep conversations. It's like 2 minutes, right? And then the eye rolls begin. So the fact that we sat there for 2 hours and mapped out what our values are and how we're going to live those, it gave us a really good roadmap to this future unknown path that we were going down. And I had another experience in plant medicine where a vision opened up to me that was really, really important, because I was still really grappling with like certain doctrines and certain things that I'm like, I now see the church for what it is, but also there were things that were really good and really important. Like, how do I navigate all of this? Because when most people leave the church, my experience is they just leave it all behind. And I'm like, I don't want to do that. And so when I was in the medicine, I was in a really quiet place, and this vision opened up where I was at a beach. And growing up in Carmel, like, the beach was that was my home. That was my safe space. And I was at this beach, this gorgeous beach. And I was digging around like all these sand castles that I had built, and each castle kind of represented like a core doctrine of Mormonism. And I dug about it. It was beautiful. I understood it really well. And I'd studied this and studied that and studied this. And my whole life was in the sandbox of doctrine and values and goals and like this whole Mormon world. And there was nothing else. Like, this was everything. And in the vision, I'm working on these sand castles, and then I look up and I look out and I realize that I'm in a four-walled sandbox on a gorgeous beach. And I'm like, wait a second. There's this whole world of expansive spirituality out there. And because of my certitude, I believe that I have everything I need right here in these four little walls. And so I bent down, I picked up the sandcastles that served me the best, the values, the practices, the doctrines, and I left the sandbox. And I began journeying on this beach of expansive spirituality. And it's been painful and scary and absolutely amazing. And I wouldn't say that I'm like happier now than I was before, because like I was happy in the church. And I'm happy now. So it's like happiness isn't really the right measure. It's more like I'm so much more content now. I'm so much more whole and at peace and feel so much more connected with deity, whatever that is, now than I ever was.
It's good to think for yourself.
Completely. And it's scary. When you don't have the muscles to be able to think for yourself, it's scary. And when you do, and you've been programmed to be like, yeah, you think that, but you're wrong, because remember, the natural man is an enemy to God. And God and that prophet, God is speaking to that prophet, so he's going to tell you exactly what you should do. And so you really, you have this like muscle like atrophy. You don't have the ability to think for, I don't want to say that. You do have the ability to think for yourself. But within spirituality, I didn't have the muscles I needed to be able to look inward and trust myself and seek guidance from within. And so it's been a learned like thing over the last few years.
It's a really wonderful story. What do you think of organized religion now?
I think that organized religion has its place. And I'm grateful for it. And I think that in many cases, like I think back about my mission in Chicago, there were people who had nothing. They had no community. Sometimes they didn't have a job. They lots of times didn't have a sense of purpose. And religion brought that. Mormonism brought that for them, brought them into the community. And then a member of the ward would be like, oh, I need help. Here, you have a job. Oh, you're part of the one true church upon the face of the earth. You have all the answers. Sense of a sense of being and sense of like who you are. Like that was all great. But the trade-off for me ultimately began to harm me. And it didn't allow me personally to develop into the person that I knew I could be. And so on one hand, it's a great platform. And on the other hand, it's a very constrictive form. And when I saw it in that vision of the box, I was like, oh, it's a little box. And it's a beautiful box in many ways, but also there are some dark shadows in this box. And not just the Joseph Smith history, church history stuff, like now, the sexual shame. I mean, what I realized is that the church is promising salvation in a very specific way. And the cost of that salvation is that I lived in shame and scrupulosity and guilt. And I realized that fear and shame were like the fuel that like ran the machine.
Yep.
And that's terrible. Nobody should have to live that way.
It's based on that.
Yes. And so I'm not one of these people that's just like, fuck religion, all the murders in the world are because of it, and the world would be a better place if all religions, all churches blew up. I really don't think that. But I also don't think that when you go to a religion or a church or commit yourself to that ideology, that's for the rest of your life, right? That you have to stick with it and endure to the end. Otherwise, you're not going to be saved. You're not going to have salvation. You're not going to have celestial glory with your heavenly parents. I don't believe any of that anymore. One of the reasons I don't is because of travel. Like, if you stay really small, like I didn't need to ask a lot of questions. As soon as I started traveling the world, I'm like, oh, there are really happy, content people in this world that have never even heard of Mormonism. What's up with that?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the most striking was 2 years ago. 2 years ago on Saturday, so almost 2 years ago, I got to go to Nepal. And it was sort of like impromptu. So I'm sitting like under the stars with my friend. He runs the #1 podcast in Mormonism called Mormon Stories. And so I'm laying on this grass at like 2 a.m. with John DeLynn, this podcaster, and he's like, "What do you want? Like, what are next steps for you?" I'm like, "I've always been called to like Nepal or Tibet or somewhere like that. There's like a new form of spirituality." And he's just like, "My buddy Noah Rasheda, who's a Buddhist, he's taking a group to Everest Base Camp in 6 weeks. Do you want me to text him and see if you can go?" And I'm like, "Well, dude, I can't prep for Everest Base Camp in 6 weeks." And he's like, "Yes, you can." And so he did. He texted him that night, and by the next day I was in. 6 weeks later, left for Nepal, and I backpacked from Lukla, Nepal, up to Everest Base Camp.
How was that?
It was amazing. It was so hard, but it was like a meditation. It was like a hiking meditation every day where there'd be an intention for us to focus on, and we would focus on that throughout the day, and it was incredible.
How long did it take?
It took 13 days. On the 10th day, I left the group. And I checked in with the guides, right, the Nepalese guides, and I just said, "Hey, I feel called to be alone for a little while." And being very good Buddhists that they are, they're like, "Well then, if that's what you need to do, then that's what you need to do." And they're like, "There's some safety measures. There are some things you need to think about." And so what happened is I left the group on the next day, and they gave me a guide to take me up to base camp. So we left like 4 a.m, got to base camp right at sunrise, and I got to spend the sunrise meditating at Everest Base Camp with nobody else there. And it was amazing. And I cried my eyes out. And then it was time to do what's called the Everest Marathon. And I hiked and ran 27 miles that day from Everest Base Camp to Namche Bazaar, all by myself, in silence. And it was a transformational experience to do something that very few humans have done, first of all, and second of all, to be able to just be utterly alone in a place that I had no context for, and to rely on myself to be able to survive. And what netted from that was that I got incredibly sick that night. Like double-headed dragon, like up all night, broke my toe, running to the bathroom, kicked the wall. Like it was bad. And all I needed was sleep. And instead I got food poisoning. And the next day I'm hiking on the trail, and this person picks me up off the side of the trail. And they're like, "You can't do this. Like, you are not in a good place." And they got me onto a helicopter, which took me down to Lukla, which is another little town in the Himalayas, and a family there took me in. And this is a family with nothing literally concrete floors, concrete walls, tin roof at 11 degrees outside. They had nothing. And they took me in and they fed me and they put me in a room that had a hot shower. And they literally like gave me what I had no ability to have. And they weren't Mormon. They weren't Christian. They were Buddhist. And they gave me everything that they had. And it was such a demonstration of pure love. That had nothing to do with religion. It had nothing to do with money. Like they wouldn't even take my money, like nothing. They're like, we're just here to help you. And then they sent me off the next day on a helicopter back to Kathmandu. And I think those types of experiences when I was there in the Himalayas, and there was another one where we did a Buddhist ritual where it was like a rebirth, where you had to burn something that was special to you to then let it go, and the idea of impermanence and letting go. And it was these types of like forms of spirituality that I was exposing myself to that showed me that, oh, dude, like you do not have the market cornered on spirituality whatsoever. And so with that, I was able to let go of the vast majority of that, like, here's who I am within Mormonism, and recreate myself and expand my spirituality in ways that have really helped me and really served me in life.
It's a wonderful story.
Thanks. It's still ongoing. I mean, you're one of the first people I've ever talked to about this, because I feel like I'm just in it. You know, it's not like this happened. It's happening.
It's nice to talk with somebody who's Mormon and still is, and not feel like, wow, what a weird, freaky, because a lot of them are just like such, they're fundamentalists maybe, and they're a little more extreme.
Totally.
It's kind of refreshing to talk with somebody who's like relatable.
Yeah. Yeah. Most of us are, right? Like most Mormons that you know are pretty relatable. I mean, think about the business world, right? Marriott, JetBlue, Visa, Harvard, it's all ran by Mormons. And way beyond that. And I think it's because we're taught these values of like working hard, being a good example to everybody out, represent the church well out there. And while you do that, normalize Mormonism so that it's not this freaky thing when I'm like, hey, do you want to read the Book of Mormon? And you're like, yeah, that's weird. That's a cult. It's like, hey, you're a good person, so maybe I trust you enough to read that Book of Mormon and talk to you about spiritual things. I think that's really important within Mormonism. And now I kind of do the same thing, but like outside of the church. And I've become this magnet for people just hitting me up and being like, hey, I've been questioning things. Hey, there's a few things that aren't sitting right. Like, would you be willing to talk? And I'm like, yeah, for sure. And like ever since I was a kid, like I always had, I guess kind of my magic is like people trust me. And being bishop, that was really helpful because people just trusted me. They knew I wouldn't judge them. And it's the same thing now where I do a lot of hiking with people where it may be the first time they ever confess to another human being that they're like, I don't think the church is what I thought it was. And it's like, oh, I can just be a warm blanket to them and not be like, yeah, fuck the church. Like, it's never that. It's like, the church is wonderful. As the Buddhists put it, there was this Buddhist monk who was on a journey. And he got to a big river. And when he got to the river, someone had left a raft there. And he got on the raft and he continued his journey down the river until the raft pulled over again for him to then get back on a trail and continue his journey. And when he turned back to the raft after he let it go, he didn't burn the raft. He didn't say, fuck that raft. It's so imperfect and I got all these slivers. The monk said, thank you to the raft. And he left it there. And then he continued his journey. And that's what I've discovered for myself and what I talk to with others is like, hey, whether you stay on the raft or don't stay on the raft, there's no wrong answer. The church being the raft. But if it is time to travel on, you don't need to believe the fears that have been placed in you by the prophets, that there's nothing but fear and misery outside of the raft, outside of the church. there can actually be great contentment and happiness. So it's okay to let go of the raft and continue your journey. It's just part of it. Be grateful for it and move on.
Beautiful story. Beau Oyler, thank you so much.
Thanks, Mark.
And I hope you have a long, happy life.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. When I was designing the first Soft White Underbelly book, I realized that there were so many great portraits that weren't going to make it into that book. They just wouldn't fit. And once I saw how well that first book sold, I knew I'd have to design a second book. This second book is finally ready to ship. Like the first one, this book has a collection of some of the best portraits from Soft White Underbelly, accompanied by a quote from that person's interview. This book features another group of Rebecca portraits, as well as a collection of color images of the Whitaker family, and plenty of others. You can order yours for $125 or $150 for a signed copy at softwhiteunderbelly.org. Again, like the first book, once this book is sold out, I will not be printing more of them. The portraits are what Soft White Underbelly is all about, and these two books contain the best of all that work. Thank you for watching.